Hello, Trewsers. Welcome to the Trews. Today we're talking about mental illness and Germanwings.
It is hard for humans to comprehend the inhumanity, like this picture of a smiling young pilot who looks like he'd sooner crash a party than ever crash a plane.
Don't do a pun on a story about crashing an aeroplane. Look at this smiley. I mean, what can we say about him? Well, he just looks like a normal guy. What do normal guys do? Crash planes? No, they crash parties. Now say that, then say the other thing, but in reverse order.
Why does a 28-year-old German man, trained to fly a plane into a mountain and kill everybody on board?
In many ways, this is a perfect Fox News modern media story because there's no way of knowing for certain what were the motivations. And in that gap of ignorance, there's room for tremendous fear, great propaganda, perfect for Fox News.
Why do masked men take doctors and relief workers and journalists and just behead them?
I think this bloke's been watching us on the Trews and it's like, why? Why don't we form connections between seemingly disconnected ideas as part of our ongoing ideology at Fox? Why?
Why does Boko Haram kidnap hundreds of girls and attack schools and churches and butcher thousands more? Something turns them, changes them, perverts them. But what? When? Why?
But what? When? Why? How? Who? Those are the main questions I learned at journalist school. I've never got to answering any of them.
None of these questions are new. We've asked them time and again before.
We've been asking them since the beginning of this broadcast. That's just all you're saying. Your script must look ridiculous, like a bunch of question marks.
About how this slightly odd fellow who apparently just loved dogs could happily butcher millions of human beings.
I mean, where are we going now? We've leapt back to Adolf Hitler. Some work's been done on the subject of Hitler, and it's that, like, at that time, anti-Semitism was widespread. German nationalism was on the rise as a result of social and economic conditions. I mean, Hitler, in a way, is a good example because Adolf Hitler, one lone madman, cannot personally be responsible for a genocide. He requires the correct conditions, and the correct conditions were created as a result of the First World War, widespread anti-Semitism across Europe. So what are the comparable conditions that lead individuals now to similarly, if not so spectacularly, act out of alignment with principles that we all understand in ourselves to be right?
They say that looks can be deceiving.
Fucking hell, mate. What is this? It's like a poem.
But we are forever being deceived. Like when we fly these days and maybe nervously eye fellow passengers on a plane, but never think about the guy piloting the plane. Or hope talking rationally to a nut will make him any less nutty, only to discover he's still a nut.
When does that happen? That's not as frequent as looking around an aeroplane. Also, though, and perhaps more importantly, is his assertion that mental illness is about otherness rather than... Like, I have mental health issues, like I'm an addict. I've not mentioned it before, I don't want to worry you. But I've also had other mental health issues around depression and bipolar, stuff that I wouldn't ascribe those labels to myself anymore because it seems insulting to people that suffer from them, it seems more severely. Me, where I've settled is in the area of drug addiction. When I deal with my drug addiction head on, that seems to cover the depression and the things that I would previously have thought of as bipolar. What I don't do, though, is look at mental illness as this thing that's happening in a field over there. It's happening in a field in there. And once you approach it in that manner, a lot of possibilities and solutions start to suggest themselves.
That is why events like these this week are so disturbing. They disturb all we think is decent. They jar us to our senses because they just don't make any sense.
Oh, God. I mean, the reason they don't make any sense is because we narrativize it through a kind of prism of individual culpability as opposed to one of inclusion. If you try and think, why did this nutty pilot just nuttily crash his plane into a mountain, then it's really hard to come up with any real answers, let alone solutions. But if you look at the cultural context in which this is occurring, answers do begin to suggest themselves. Suicide is now the biggest killer of young men. That's a bit of information you don't have. I don't, like, when I'm hanging around young men, which is all too frequently, I don't think the most likely way for these people to die is by killing themselves. You know, you're more likely to think, I don't know, traffic accident, illness. No, the most likely way for them to die is that they one day go, oh, fuck this, I'm out. Mood disorders such as depression are the third most common cause of hospitalisation in the US. At some point in their lives, 50% of adults have symptoms of mental illness. It's only half of people are skipping through life without it. Nearly 60% of people who experience mental illness receive no help at all, just left to work it out. So far from being something weird, peculiar, uncommon, it's like some normal thing that's happening all the time. Why is it happening all the time? Why are we living in the times of a mental illness plague?
Like when a pilot deliberately crashes a plane and we all push and dig for answers.
He don't push and dig for answers, does he? If an answer's any further than the tip of his own eyelash, he stops looking.
The airline that wants to know why. The authorities that want to know how. The insurance companies that want to know how much.
The insurance companies want to know how can we avoid paying out for it.
And the families and relatives that just want to know something, anything. All trying to make sense of the senseless, and like us, feeling so clueless and helpless. And it scares us, all of us.
The reason Fox News can't be honest about what causes mental illness is because Fox News is what causes mental illness. Fox News are the propaganda machine of capitalism, a system that separates us from one another and tells us the way to solve our individual problems is through purchasing, through buying things, through identifying primarily with our roles as consumers, not as active citizens or participants in society, members in communities that should care about others, but people that should be condemning those that are weak, vilifying people that act in any way that's unusual. We know in the core of our being that that isn't right. So it creates a friction and a tension. We know that what he's saying isn't true. Serious mental illness rates are 6 times what they were in the 50s, coinciding, of course, with the rise in capitalism. Now, you could say, oh, that's because it's more commonly defined, we have different means for measuring it. But it is interesting, isn't it, that in an unequal, increasingly unnatural society where a tiny elite lord power over a vast majority, that feelings of tension and confusion start to rise and create the perfect conditions for mental illness.
It's like we're all flying blind, going through life on a wing and a prayer.
This book, Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, which I'm always harping on about, talks about our tendency to blame individuals as opposed to societies for the plague of mental illness. Instead of treating it as incumbent on individuals to resolve their own psychological distress, we should accept that the vast privatisation of stress has taken place over the last 30 years. How has it become acceptable that so many people, especially young people, are mentally ill? The mental health plague in capitalist society suggests that instead of being the only social system that works, capitalism is inherently dysfunctional and that the cost of it appearing to work is very high. So, it's our way of telling stories, which is what Fox News does. Fox News tells a story of individuals malfunctioning and causing problems. The reality is we live in a system that causes individuals to malfunction because we have a lack of cohesion, a lack of connection, and a lack of truth. If you want incidents like this, and like the montage at the beginning suggested, less mad individuals, whether it's Adolf Hitler, ISIS, or the fella crashing the plane, if you want less problems of this nature, I believe the solution is not to look at madness, evil, darkness as an outside issue, but as an internal issue. Solzhenitsyn says the line between good and evil runs not between nations and races, but through every human heart. And if you can have an honest conversation about your own mental illness, like I, on a daily basis, have conversations with people where I say, I'm feeling really ill and I want to act out in this way, I need to distract myself in this way, and people go, well, that's not going to make you feel any better. And because I have the facility to talk openly, it means that less people are harmed by my actions. We can never have that conversation publicly because Fox News and big corporations benefit from things being the way they are. For things not to change, when something goes crazy or wrong, they say it's a result of that individual. This is an isolated case. Because if you start to say, but what about this individual, this individual, this individual, all these problems, is there a way they're connected? That leads you inevitably to the conclusion that something has to change. And the only way things can change is by addressing the powerful. Because the powerful are the people that keep things the way they are. So they tell you stories that it's individuals that malfunction, not societies, cultures, financial systems, because once we admit that that's the problem, then we have to change society as a whole. That's some true news. Subscribe here.
Nose is a tool that is abused to fool you and to leave you scared and confused. Trews is like the nose. If the nose was true, I want some Trews. Let's have some Trews.